everyone. Going through a bit more of a DC universe topic today, discussing Batman. And if you've seen the title, we're going to be specifically talking about his moniker as the world's greatest detective. What exactly does that entail? Does it have any actual bearing in the stories? And does it make Batman a more interesting character, or is it something that has been moved on a lot of media? And to tackle such a kind of far-reaching historical Batman topic, I've had to go to Gotham itself. Like, I've had to go where Metropolis is. I had to take a 2-minute boat ride across the river to go to the Gotham, apparently. I then hacked onto Wayne Manor, went into the Batcave, and lo and behold, just hopping out of the Batmobile, I saw my good friend, Alex. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me on to talk about this. It's a really, really interesting topic, and I think that even your opening statement brought up really good questions about it and kind of what kind of impact it has for Batman. So I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, and Alex here, in case you haven't had any Batman whatsoever, like the Twitters specifically, you can find him on Let's Talk Batman. There's an I in there somewhere, so
Yeah, the
just
L in talk is an I, but it's fine. Just it's good.
and on he has a awesome podcast, which I think you guys should check out if you like my content, like just listen to Batman stuff specifically, or just comic book stuff generally, with him and his friend Ander, called Omni Comics Podcast, which if you look up there, like Twitter has all the links which you can listen to them, and I very recommend that. But specifically on the topic at hand, so I guess I'll just open with this question, Alex. Do you think Batman should be the world's greatest detective?
Oh, absolutely. I think one, it's just even though we haven't seen it in a lot of media recently, which I guess we'll get into later, I think that as starting out, like that was one of the things that he did. Like he is a detective from the beginning. And over time, the myth behind how he got there and like all the training that he's gone through and what that leads to just his day to day, or I guess night to night operations as Batman, like it's such a huge part of his character. I mean, he's got this like super bat computer and all these forensics devices and things like that, and it's something that people know him as, like especially in the the main comic like universe. People always throw his name in the mention whenever they're talking about the world's greatest detectives. I like to think that he is the world's greatest detective. I like to think that moniker is accurate in that sense. There are a ton of really, really incredible like comic detectives in that universe, but I think that it's just something that it makes Batman really. It's just another special layer to Batman for me, and I think that if you take that away, like you lose so much of his character, like because just it would have such big like shockwave throughout. I mean, his entire operation really, because like with that not there, you just lose his analysis of like every situation basically. Like he just becomes pretty much a fundamentally different character in the way that he thinks and kind of operates. And so yeah, I think it's really important, and I think that I mean like I said, I think that he's the world's greatest detective. So there's actually a story coming up pretty soon where we're going to get to see a lot of his training for that in Detective Comics 1000, which I'm super excited about, because I think that's one aspect of his training that, while it is touched on in a lot of books, I don't think that it's focused on as much as maybe his like physical, becoming a just complete master of his body and super ninja and all that. I don't think it's given as much spotlight as that. So
No, and I feel you. The point at the end there really touched upon something which has kind of changed as he's evolved over the character. Specifically, once we started getting more and more adaptions, I feel like post Adam West is when he really started to lose the detective aspect. At least in like the movie specifically, like Tim Burton's Batman kind of like propelled the character to like new heights and stardom. But that really did also like focus less on the detective aspect and more so on the mysterious, dark ninja figure who beats people up and is a gadget expert. And we moved away from his intelligence being strictly on solving crimes, more so to being able to defeat people with higher and higher tech, or being able to use his mind in situations apart from crime scene solving. Because if you look at the character, Batman, especially compared to Superman, Batman isn't as revolutionary of an idea. There have been dark characters who strike out at the night to defeat criminals. You only have to look at Zorro or the Shadow, who's a pulp hero. And that's where you can kind of see the influence that Bob Kane took. But I feel like why Batman specifically is like Bill Finger's character is because he really emphasized, okay, what makes Batman different is he won't just stop the criminals. He'll think about why the criminal did it, how they did it, and then prevent it from happening again. Because in order for Bruce Wayne to be, because a lot of people like to portray Batman as like a cynical person, and he is to an extent, but I feel like specifically in the comics, Batman wholeheartedly believes that he can one day stop all crime. And that's a very naive belief. It's a very childlike belief because Batman is very much the same child that was in the alleyway. And in order to do that, he has to understand crime. And the only way to understand crime is to think like a detective. So it's this very primal idea at the heart of Batman that a lot of adaptations miss.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. I think one of the reasons that we don't see it in as many adaptations, especially live action, is that I think that like a really, really good detective story is a lot harder to do than that mystique of him being that figure in the night and, beating people like to a pulp and using all these gadgets and stuff. And while that's awesome, like those are some of the aspects that I also love about Batman a lot. I think that the detective story for Batman they're my favorite Batman stories. I think that they're the best Batman stories. They can offer so much for him, and I just think that the comic form lends itself easier to telling that story, like having a more long, drawn out. Granted, not all of them have to be super long, but it's just I think easier to do that in general than it would be to translate to the big screen, and so I think that might be part of it. And then yeah, like you mentioned, just whenever the '89 movie came out, especially, like it just completely like catapulted Batman into a whole new level. And so obviously like cues were taken from that moving forward. But yeah, it is interesting because I like the point that you brought up with the very much childlike belief that he does think that he can stop crime completely. And I mean, I completely agree with that. It is something that like that's his goal. He wants to end all crime in Gotham. And I like that in some else worlds or like future adaptations, we see kind of the extents that he goes to try to do. But yeah, him just trying to stop it as a whole is a childlike belief, but it's kind of, he, like you said, he is that broken child from the alley. But, it's just fundamentally changed him, and so now he's doing all he can to strike out against that.
Yeah, and I feel like it's an aspect that for Batman to continue to keep his popularity in this wave of superheroes becoming more popular, like names which were very, very, very not well known at all, like the Guardians of the Galaxy becoming superstars overnight practically. Batman's got a lot more competition for his top dog spot that he kind of had ever since The Dark Knight Returns, when like he beat out of Superman's hands, quite literally.
Yeah.
He's had a lot more like but after that it was kind of just Batman and Spider-Man were like the two biggest superhero characters, and then Superman's kind of like wimping along outside them just because he was the first, even though a lot of his adaptations were lacking like charm compared to that. So Batman could kind of coast without having to heighten what makes him unique. But when you start bringing in characters like Iron Man, characters like Daredevil, characters like Moon Knight, or even people like The Question or Green Arrow, they're all very similar, at least in base concept, to Batman, or in certain aspects. Like you've got the billionaire, you've got the gadgets, you've got the tech, you've got the violence, you've got the broodiness, you've got those kind of aspects. And so Batman adaptations that don't focus on the detective aspect have led him to kind of losing a lot of his luster in recent years, where the public, I think this is safe to say, I don't know if you've noticed as well, but like the public is a lot more negative on Batman now than they were when, say, The Dark Knight came out.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I see a lot of I mean, people are just, they think that he's overexposed in some regards, and to an extent I would agree. I think the bottom line when it comes down to that is the fact that Batman sells, and Batman always will sell. So of course we're going to get a ton of Batman. But I think that you brought up a really good point with how similar he is to a lot of other characters as far as a base concept. But the thing that makes Batman so special, especially to me, is the fact that he basically takes all of those different elements that these characters excel at and like rolls them into pretty much one package. And he's all of them. And so there's so many different facets to his character. And if you really want to kind of um, show that to its best extent and kind of highlight all of those, it works the best if you're able to explore each of those elements and kind of show why they're there and why they're so great. And then you get this, this huge picture of like, oh, this is why Batman is so awesome of a character. It's because he can do this, and this. And I think that the detective aspect is one that has fallen to the wayside recently, especially in more mainstream things, and even in the comics to an extent. There's been way less detective focused comics recently, which I can name a couple in a minute if you wanted to talk about that. But
Yeah, that's specifically what I was. You can finish your point, man. Don't worry.
but and so it's something that I definitely think that we need to see a resurgence of, because it'll be at this point it'll be kind of a breath of fresh air to see Batman going back into those detective roots, seeing more of those detective stories. And there are some things coming up on the horizon and some signs that I've kind of been seeing even in the comics that it looks like they are going in that direction more again. And I think that it'll really, really benefit his character in all media if they can really, grab those detective roots and bring them back to the forefront.
No, I totally agree. I think you've really you put that pretty much spot on. I'll ask you then, because we're kind of hinting at this. First of all, though, we've talked about how his detective aspect has fallen to the wayside a bit. What are some stories or recommendations you would give to people if you wanted to make them see why that detective aspect is important in stories, like detective Batman stories that you would recommend to people?
Okay, I mean the first one has definitely got to be the Long Halloween.
Yeah.
It's so iconic. I'm pretty much, I don't want to say most people, but a lot of people have definitely heard of it. It's The Dark Knight took a lot of inspiration from it, but I think that it's pretty much the perfect like long form detective tale for Batman. It is pure mystery from cover to cover. So that's a really great one. Hush is another one that I really like. I don't think it's as solid as a detective story because the twist is kind of a little bit obvious throughout the book, but it does show him doing a lot of his deducing and trying to put pieces together and things like that. So I like that one. Court of Owls, I think, is a really good one.
Yeah.
I think that one's nice just because you see him trying to be a detective even from his earliest years. Like as a child, it's something that is in him. It's a part of him. And so I like seeing that explored. And then also the undercutting of Batman's whole mythology and knowing Gotham, and then Gotham showing him something that he didn't know is just a whole other aspect that I really like from that one. And then actually, one of my favorite Batman detective stories just ended in Detective Comics. I don't remember what the first issue of it was. I want to say it was like 992 or something, but it ended with Detective Comics 999 this past week, and it's from Peter Tomasi and Doug Mankey, and it was a really, really great detective story. Like I was so excited to be reading it from release to release. It was just kept on introducing more and more mystery in each one, and it was really compelling tell, and worked in a lot of Batman mythology, which I think is something that really, I guess, is a kind of a common theme in the detective stories that I really love for him the most, is that they're able to weave in so much of his world, like so many different characters or something about Gotham or just something else, and it kind of being able to bring all these things together and have him try to like figure out and piece together this like go through this maze and piece together the puzzle of what's going on, is something that is one of the reasons I think they work so well and what makes them so great. So yeah, those are kind of my top Batman detective stories.
And I feel like I'll add to that list just a little bit. Is I feel like if you want another, if you read Court of Owls and you're like, oh, I like the style of detective story, I think then you go back chronologically to Black Mirror, which is Dick Grayson Batman.
Oh,
But that is
yes.
a really, really, really good detective story, which kind of shows how the moniker, that not just Bruce Wayne has to be a detective, the mantle of Batman. To be truly a good Batman, you have to be a good detective, no matter who wears that cowl, which I really appreciate. And also, I think Grant Morrison's Batman Gothic is a really good one and done Batman detective story with a bit of a supernatural twist, which I think it can get a little creepy, a little bit heavy there, but I feel like the detective story of Batman not only allows you to get into some of the darker, more realistic aspects of Batman stories, but you can also explore, okay, what is a detective story in the DC universe like? And that has its own interesting aspects and kind of craziness that goes along with it. So those would be my recommendations. To close up, Alex, I guess I'll just say, what do you think you would recommend for people to keep an eye out on the future in terms of Batman being a detective?
I think the biggest one for especially mainstream, even though we're a couple years away at this point, Matt Reeves' Batman solo movie, like the Batman, everything that he said from the beginning is that he wants to tell a point of view, noir driven detective story for Batman. And as soon as I heard that he said that, like hype levels through the stratosphere. I think that he's one of the most talented directors working today, and so the way that he talks about this, talks about movies and what he wants to do for Batman, I think that we are in store for a really, really good detective story there, which I just can't wait to see. He said that he's going to use the Rogues Gallery will be present, so it's going to be incorporating, like I mentioned, a lot of Batman's world into that. So that's going to be exciting. And then also with Detective Comics 1000 coming out, and then this recent Detective comic story, it seems like they're going more into Batman being a detective in the comic universe as well, like leaning more into that. Detective Comics will be the title, ironically, which I think you could definitely be on the lookout for to continue that Batman solving cases and mysteries. And then with the 1000th issue, Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo are doing a story where they're highlighting Batman going through his training as a detective and then also introducing a new team to the DC universe called the Detectives Guild, which shows Batman and like Vic Sage the Question and the Hawks and Detective Chimp and a few others. And so we're not sure yet if that'll spawn into its own like mini series. I would honestly be surprised if it doesn't at this point. The immediate reaction that I saw to that lineup online was stellar. And since the Snyder and Capullo introducing them, I can definitely see it, sticking. So that'll be something to look out for. And then it kind of feels like with that, and then even this recent Batman and Flash crossover, the Price, which was a pretty good detective story, not a great one, but he uses it a little bit there. I think that they are kind of taking notice in DC Comics, that is, and wanting to lean more into Batman detective stories going forward, which I'm super excited about. I said it the other day, it feels like we're kind of getting a resurgence in them wanting to go for that. And so I'm thrilled.
Mm-hmm. It's exciting times, and hopefully this discussion has maybe mud you, if you haven't been a fan of Batman because of you think he's overdone, or you've seen everything you can with him, maybe check out some of these stories we've mentioned. They offer a different take of Batman that has been underutilized, but hopefully we'll be seeing a resurgence. So Alex, thank you again for joining me on this. You are a resident Batman expert, and I don't think I could have made this without you.
Thank you for having me on. It was a great time. I'm always down to talk Batman and his detective stuff. Thank you.
Definitely. So hope everyone has enjoyed listening. We all wish you well, and most of all, take it easy.